Thank you, Alan. Good afternoon, everyone. I am a consultant working in human resources and learning and development, and I have a particular focus on that right-hand side of that slide that you just described. So I'll try to share some of my perspectives about what this future world around talent, around capability management looks like. As well as a consultant, I am an author. These days, I also blog. It doesn't generate any revenue for me, but it takes up a huge amount of my time and may lead somewhere someday, who knows. And I want to talk about organisation capability, what it is, the benefits that capability might provide you, how you can identify it, how you can identify the appropriate capability for your own particular organisation. And I'll also be talking about learning and development's role within managing and developing capability, how you can do that most effectively. But I just wanted to start by positioning capability and making sure that everybody understands sort of what it is and what it represents. And this slide presents some of the key factors which influence your company's market value. So investors will buy or sell shares in your company depending upon their expectations of future profits. And those expectations will be significantly influenced by the things on the left-hand side of this slide. So tangible assets, which account for the net book value of your company, and intangible assets, which is everything else. Things that you can't see or touch, but are critical in making your company valuable. Now, obviously, for those of you in the public or voluntary sector, that doesn't quite apply, but these things are still absolutely critical. It's just that you value them in a slightly different way. And as Jay was saying in his keynote this morning, progressively over time, the intangibles are becoming much more important. So Jay had that slide showing the progression over time. The fact that I use is that over the last 25 years, the value of intangibles in the stock market have increased from 60% to 560% of the value of fixed assets. So the intangibles are becoming significantly more important. Part of the intangibles is the brand value, and the rest is what is commonly described as organisational capability, which Dave Ulrich has defined as things a company knows how to do well. Its ability to use resources, to achieve results, to act in ways that lead to accomplishment. And it can be a whole range of things, from a shared mindset to learning, accountability, talent, collaboration, innovation, quality of leadership, etc. In many ways, it's a fairly similar concept to that of core competencies, which has been around a little bit longer and is a little bit more well known. Core competencies tend to focus much more on business processes, whereas organisational capability is much more about what's happening internally within an organisation, about its management processes. It's about the way that an organisation works rather than what it does. So Hamill and Prahalad, for example, the professors who originated the term core competencies, define 3M's core competence as expertise in coatings, substrates, and adhesives. Whereas an organisational capability perspective for 3M might suggest that its capability is something around innovation, the ability of its people to innovate new products. And okay, that innovation may be in a context of stickiness, but it's the innovation that's the fundamental essence of their success. Organisation capability itself is made up of three things shown here. Organisation capital, first of all, is things like the organisation structure, the business processes that enable people to do their work. Social capital, which is about the networks, relationships between people working in the organisation. And human capital, which is the skills, abilities, and the motivations that they bring to work with them. So human capital is largely about engagement and competency. And it's obviously that competency piece which is the main opportunity for learning and development practitioners to influence organisation capability. So as I go on to talk about capability, please do bear in mind that learning and development has a very significant opportunity to influence that largely through competencies. And importantly, competencies which are aligned with organisation capability. So what do we know about organisation capability? Well, first of all, we know that it's increasingly important in supporting implementation of business strategy. And I think companies increasingly are recognising that it's not the quality of their strategy, but it's the ability of their people to implement it that often makes the difference. So in his book, Execution, Ram Charan defines that ability to execute as the missing link between aspirations and results. So organisation capability gives organisations that ability to translate strategy into what happens. Latest thinking and research on capability also suggests that different companies have and indeed need different capabilities. So for example, Harvard professor Nitin Noria, in his study of evergreen companies, identified that what made very successful organisations so was the fact that they have a very sound grasp of the business basics. Things like strategy, execution, culture and structure. But they also supplement that with mastery in at least 2 of 4 secondary management practices, which he says are talent, leadership, innovation, and the ability to manage mergers and partnerships. So there's something there about the excellent companies don't try to do everything. They focus on what's going to be really important to them. And in a sense, you can go back to another Harvard professor, Michael Porter, who emphasizes that competitive strategy isn't just about what an organization is going to do, it's as much, if not more, about what that company isn't going to do. And the same applies to organization capability. Companies can't do everything, and therefore there's a need to focus, to think about which 1 or 2 or 3 capabilities are going to make a significant difference to an organization's ability to provide excellent services, to transform what it's about, and to gain competitive advantage. But organisation capability isn't just about implementation. This link between business strategy and organisation capability also works in the reverse direction. So the top arrow here is about implementing business strategy, taking the business plan and translating it into capability terms. The bottom arrow is about how can organisations create new capabilities that will enable them to set different or more stretching business goals. The top arrow is about taking the business plan and thinking, if we need to implement this, we need better leaders or more innovative people or whatever. The bottom arrow is about looking at the people in the organisation and thinking, we've got some very collaborative people, or we have a really tightly aligned mindset across the organisation. And they may not be there quite yet, but if we develop those, that could give us a great opportunity for competitive differentiation. And the bottom arrow is much more transformational than the one at the top. In terms of how you identify the capability, or the 1 or 2 or 3 capabilities that will be right for your organisation, I think if you're looking at that top arrow, looking at the capability that will support implementation of business strategy, actually that's fairly straightforward, and it's largely about measurement. So it's about taking the business strategy, thinking about what capability you need to implement that, measuring how much of that capability you currently have, and identifying the gap. And there you are. If you're talking about the bottom arrow, you're looking for capability that will provide the basis of new opportunities. I think things are a little bit more complicated. And measurement, in my experience, doesn't have such a critical role. And that's partly because You're looking at new things within the organisation, so it's not always obvious what thing you need to measure. And I think Chris shortly will describe a very good example of using competencies in an organisation to understand what's going on. The danger of doing that is you get so much data that that data confuses and obscures insight rather than highlights it. So an alternative may be to recognise that people are emotional beings and to use an emotional or lateral or intuitive approach to the identification of what sort of capability may be appropriate to you. So techniques like visualization, metaphor, approaches like appreciative inquiry, more artful, intuitive approaches may provide better opportunities to identify those critical capabilities for your particular organisation. Within this scenario, measurement is still useful, but its use tends to be much more about measuring, monitoring, implementation of capability development actions rather than identifying what that capability is in the first place. And in either scenario, whether you're looking at implementation or new opportunities, in my experience, I would suggest it's very difficult to identify any sort of standard measures or metrics because we're looking at capability that is the right capability for your particular organisation at a particular point in time. And almost by definition, therefore, is different to other organisations' capabilities. So, you can't use the measures that other organisations are using because they're trying to measure something different. It's about identifying the measures which are appropriate for you. And in my experience, it's that identification of the capability which is the hard thing to do. Once you're clear what that capability is, actually identification of the measures generally isn't too difficult. So I would suggest that there is no standard list of measures, but I think I can recommend a fairly standard approach to measurement. And I would suggest that all organisations should measure at least 3 things. And the first is the activities that they're undertaking, the learning and development and other activities that are going to create or to develop this capability. Secondly, the output of those activities or the capability itself. And thirdly, the impact of those activities and the output on the business and particularly the financial results. I think if you can measure those 3 things, then you have a very sound system for managing this. And I want to describe a fairly topical case study of this sort of approach, which is Whirlpool. And this is a previously fairly stodgy manufacturer of domestic appliances, which has been investing in a capability around innovation for the last 7 years and has dramatically transformed itself into an innovative leader in domestic appliances. And this company's transformation started right at the end of the last millennium, when it realised that its ongoing strategy of that time of cost-cutting wasn't going to provide it with a sustainable future. Its products had become commodities, part of that big white sea that you see in any domestic appliance store. And its prices were declining by 3% per year. So it was a pretty awful place to be. And Whirlpool developed a new strategy that said, we are going to focus on innovation, we're going to create innovative products in order to charge premium prices for what we do. That's a big change. And the first thing they did was to send 25 of their people on a year's assignment to go and brainstorm and to identify new products. And probably not a great surprise for many people that failed abysmally. They generated very few ideas and even fewer that had any business commercial relevance. So they sat down again and thought, well, what do we really need to do? And they asked themselves the question, how would our organisation look differently when we have implemented this change process? And they decided that what they needed was a complete change in culture to an environment where all employees took responsibility for innovating rather than being cajoled to do so by the select few. So they embarked upon a major transformation program. They trained well over 5,000 managers and employees in innovating, which, given the dispersed workforces, the multiple languages and so on, was largely delivered through an e-learning solution. And they supported that through other human capital-oriented activities. So, for example, they made innovation a very major part of top managers' long-term bonus plans. In terms of organisation capital, they introduced a new innovation portal where employees could go in and access tools about innovation and could also contribute their ideas for new products. And that program has been tremendously successful. Probably one of the major reasons has been the consistent approach to this focus over a significant number of years now. But it hasn't been an easy journey for them. There has been a lot of criticism. Quite a few of their senior leaders, analysts, criticised them that this strategy was just too radical, and they thought that this immense focus on innovation was going to take them away from their existing strengths in manufacturing efficiency. The other thing that they struggled with was that they felt unable to clearly articulate what the financial results of this focus was going to be. So they did measure the program. They used the 3 levels to measurement that I just described. So in terms of activity, they measured the numbers of people who'd been trained in innovation. In output, they measured the number of people who were actually innovating actively, which they got through a regular employee survey. And in outputs, they measured the revenues generated through innovative products. But firstly, they found it very difficult to set a target for innovation, at least initially, because who was to say whether this new approach should generate $500 million or $1 billion? It was just unknown. And secondly, they found it very difficult when they did have new products to say whether that was generated because of this new focus on innovation or whether that's something that would have happened anyway. And to me, that goes back to Jay's introduction, where he was saying that it's very difficult to predict. Life's just too complicated these days, and Whirlpool absolutely recognised that fact. So for them, it was, well, we can't measure this necessarily in financial terms, but we know it's the right thing to do. So again, one of the other sessions earlier, we talked about return on investment. Return on investment here was just not relevant. That's not what it was about. It's about, if we're going to survive as an organisation, this is what we need to do, and we need to do it well. And we have to trust that the financial results will be there. The good news is that they are. The company's share price has doubled since 2001. Revenues have increased by 10% per year. The proportion of those revenues that come from innovative products has increased from $10 million to $760 million out of a complete turnover, I think, of about $14 billion. So a major increase in the amount of innovation, but still quite a long way to go. And in fact, the company has now said that a goal of $3 billion from innovative new products should be quite attainable over the next few years. So I think, to me at least, that presents a very clear picture of the opportunity that's provided by capability and the sort of benefits it can provide. I just want to finish by talking about learning and development's role within this sort of process. And I thought this was quite interesting. This is the CIPD's annual learning and development survey from last year. And one of the questions they asked was about learning and development's involvement in the overall organisational strategy. And they found, looking at this light blue segment of the pie chart towards the top and the right, that about a third of learning and development practitioners are involved in organisation strategy from the initial planning stages. And I think that's great because that gives L&D an opportunity to surface conversations about organisation capability in terms of developing new opportunities for the business. So you've got a great role in maximising the opportunity this provides. There's also about a third of practitioners down at the bottom of the pie in the light purple who are involved in organisation strategy, but only after the major decisions have been made. And that's pretty good too, and that will certainly give you the opportunity to talk about organisation capability, but probably much more focused on implementation than it is about using it to provide new opportunities. And then there's another third of practitioners who really don't get involved in the strategy to do anything on organisation capability at all. So my suggestion would be we need to move anti-clockwise around this pie towards that first segment. And the reason why I think that's so critical is that I do think, and I've got experience of working with organisations where this is the case, that it does provide a fundamentally different opportunity for L&D. And to me, this is about accountability. And I think one of the reasons why sometimes L&D finds it difficult to get a strategic role in the organisation is it's not that accountable for much that's hugely important in the organisation. It has a lot of responsibility. You know, it can be, it's responsible for that whole area of learning, but it's generally only accountable for things like implementing a new learning system, delivering a course, designing a new learning strategy. It's those sort of things. But it's very difficult for L&D to take accountability for actual learning, because I think line managers supported by employees need to take accountability. So L&D has responsibility for supporting it. And as soon as you don't have accountability, you know, you're down in the hierarchy. And L&D certainly can't take accountability for business results. You know, we've already talked about that in the connection of Whirlpool. It can set up the capability that will make organisational results more likely, but it can't make it happen. Why I think organisation capability is so interesting is I think L&D can take and be held accountable for organisation capability, or at least the competency part of it. So, you know, what is the capability? Agree that with the business. What's going to make the difference? What are the competencies that are required within that? And to commit, L&D is going to provide those competencies, the competencies which are going to provide this organisation's future. And I think as soon as you start having this conversation, you know, it significantly changes L&D's positioning. And again, you can't guarantee the business results, but if you provide the right competencies, you're setting the organisation up for success. And I think that's probably me. I mentioned before that I am a regular blogger. I was sort of thinking I was going to come to this conference and live blog. So, you know, I'm sort of there at the back of the room typing into my BlackBerry and posting by the end of each session, which I find quite fun, but I have to say is quite tiring. So I'm not doing that. I will be posting after the end of the conference tomorrow. Just in case, I mean, the one other thing I would have talked about if I had a little bit more time was the role of technology in supporting capability. Obviously, technology being of considerable interest to most people being here. I've not got time to do it. I will post on it tomorrow, or obviously we can discuss that during the questions after Chris. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed.